Hello, Amplify You family. It's Michelle Abraham, your host here today. And again, I'm bringing you so many amazing people, but this one in particular is someone I got to meet in person not too long ago before the world closed down. And I have the pleasure of bringing her to you today. Her name is GreenForest. She is the podcast host of two podcasts, Men on Purpose and Wickedly Smart Women. And there's a whole story behind that we're going to talk about today. But not only that, but Emerald is the founder of the Creative Age Consulting Group, which really helps speakers get their message out in a bigger way in the world, which is much like what we do at Amplify You. So I'm super excited to jam with you on this particular topic and how we can help people just share their message in a huge way. You just also wrote a book called Message to Millions, Discover Your Destiny. Did I get that right?
Nope, it's called Be Heard by, it's okay, no worries. Be Heard by Millions and Live Your Destiny. Be Heard by Millions and Live Your Destiny.
I love it. Yeah. We'll show you how to get that book a little bit later on in this interview, but I want to say welcome, huge welcome to Emerald. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here. And it was a pleasure to meet you in person at the last live event for who knows how long.
That's right. Yes, we were all in this live event and the next day we left and that was the last time all of us were ever on a plane or outside in the world. And here we are a few months later. So
exactly. Yeah.
Making the most of it. And aren't we thankful that we do everything virtually already?
Exactly. I feel like I've been, set up for this for years. So it was barely a blip on my radar screen.
Exactly. I love that. And let's take us back to that story, actually. How did you get started with speaking virtually and being in the whole podcasting world and starting your Creative Age group? I'd love to hear the backstory to all that.
Yeah. So for many years, I was in the real estate business, and then I had a spiritual awakening and had my own art gallery and healing art center for a couple of years. And then I got the call to speak. And when I got the call to speak, I was a newly single mom with a 6 or 7 year old. And I knew that I had to speak, like I was called. I had to speak. And I knew I was called to speak to a global audience. And so I looked at the traditional speaking model, and it required like 265 days on the road every year. And I was a single mom, and that just wasn't happening. So my calling to be a speaker was in competition with my commitment to be a mom. And thank God for the technology angels, Michelle, because right around that same time, people started to really begin to use online speaking and virtual speaking. And so I would say I was a pioneer in the virtual speaking world. And I began virtual speaking in 2008. And over the course of the last dozen years, I've generated almost, a little more than $2 million from home in my pajamas as a single mom. Was the one that was able to make all the cookies for the football team for every game, and, cashed in from my couch for a long time. And so it wasn't until 2017, late in 2017, that I came into podcasting because I had some personal crises, things that happened, and everything was starting to change in my life. And I needed to rethink how I was doing my work and my business and who I was serving. And so I rebranded in 2017. And at that point in my journey, I was suddenly called to serve men. Up until then, I had been primarily serving women, helping them to feel great speaking and powerful asking for money. And then all of a sudden I was called to serve men. And that was when Creative Age Consulting was born, and when the Men on Purpose podcast was brought to life early January 2018. And within 6 weeks, the podcast was number 194 on the Apple charts. And within 4 months, I had monetized the show with a 5-figure client. And over the course of the last now it's almost 2.5 years, the show has grown and grown. We're now in 97 countries. It's a number 41 on the Apple charts in marketing in the US. It's number 2 in Spain, which is pretty awesome. So it's an international number 2 podcast show. And recently I also launched my second podcast in September of 2019. I launched Wickedly Smart Women. Within 4 days, that was number 75 in entrepreneurship in the US. And so yeah, so that's a little bit of the story of how I got started in virtual speaking and how I got started in podcasting. I think I answered your question.
Amazing. You did. Thank you so much. That's great to have the backstory of it. And we're going to dive into the podcast in a few minutes. I'm going to go back to the virtual speaking. So when you talk about virtual speaking, you're talking about like speaking on virtual summits, like online webinars. Which one was you mostly?
Yeah. So originally I began speaking on radio shows. So I did a lot of speaking on Blog Talk Radio, and then I also did a lot of speaking on telesummits. And I've been on probably about 700 virtual stages. I never had podcasts on my radar until late 2017. And so in late 2017, I started speaking on podcasts, and now I'm almost at 100 different podcasts. So this is probably number 100 that I've spoken on.
Awesome.
So podcasts are only a recent addition to but yes, teleseminars, telesummits, radio shows, and then, using my own platform to create webinars and virtual speaking opportunities for myself as well.
That's awesome. And so virtual summits were really, really popular a few years ago. And now I've seen them, I've seen a resurgence just recently in the last few months, but over the last few years, I've done a few myself and I've been speaking on a lot of them. Now, do you find that the virtual summits now are kind of have the same impact on your business and you get the same sort of downloads for your free gift as you would have a few years ago?
Well, let me tell you, Michelle, I actually launched a virtual summit in 2010 in the fall of 2010 of my own, at the time when summits were actually paid for. You would pay to be a guest, like as if you were going to a live event, as if you were going to, gather in some city in some conference room. You would pay for your ticket to the telesummit. So the first time I actually did my own telesummit was right at the cresting of that wave of paid telesummits, where people were starting to offer free telesummits. And so I set up my model to have a paid telesummit. It was like $297 for the ticket, and I had 20 speakers. And I ended up with 6 people who registered because the model had shifted to free. And then for a long time, people were doing the free model of telesummits, and they were gathering lists. And then it started to, I think, diminish to a certain extent the amount of impact that people were having and the quality of leads that people were acquiring. However, I feel like, just like at the ocean, where the wave comes, it crashes, it pulls out, and then another wave comes in again. With COVID, I think there is a massive audience, like a tsunami audience that is now arriving, looking to be served. And it wouldn't surprise me if I saw some paid telesummits show up again on the scene. So, I can't tell you how in the last 2 months it's impacted my list, because literally I've just been, going on a few, and I haven't really been paying attention. I've been more interested in speaking. But, I think that they're not something that's going away. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. I think they're staying around, and we're getting a lot of people actually asking about, they're coming to us to start a podcast, but they don't actually have a list yet. Would you recommend doing a telesummit to them as part of a way to kind of build your list before you launch a show?
Yeah, if I was going to work with somebody to start a podcast, the first thing I would say to them is get yourself out speaking on podcasts. Number one, to, feel what it feels like to be on that other side of the mic, and also to kind of look at the behind the scenes systems that other people have set up. Some are really efficient systems and some are like a real mess. Get yourself established first as a speaker, rather than trying to build an audience with podcasting immediately. I think my podcasts were extraordinarily successful because I already had a 10-year web of connections that I had made with other thought leaders who helped me to cross promote, and with other, speaking hosts who wanted to be part of my podcast and were willing to promote and boost the visibility of my podcast. And I myself have been on almost 700 stages, so I know what the heck I'm doing, right? I don't think I think what happens is people think, oh my God, I need to start a podcast. And then the next thing you know, 6 weeks later, they're in what we like to call pod fade.
Yeah.
Pod fade, because they don't realize it is actually, I mean, it's a production. It's a production process. And until I actually just recently sold Men on Purpose podcast, even though I knew I was doing all these things and I had a team doing all these things, in the process of selling the Men on Purpose podcast, the buyer asked for detailed SOPs. And that really forced me to look at all the little tiny tasks and details that I have in place, systematized, that I do, my team does, and so forth, that actually makes it work, on top of the fact that I have all of these connections already. So I don't think I'd recommend to somebody to immediately start in podcasting without any kind of foundation under them yet.
Yeah, I agree with you too. I think being a guest is like, there's such a perfect opportunity right now to be a guest on so many virtual summits, so many different podcasts right now, and to get a feel for that field. And like you said, just to get a feel for people's processes too. So when you were out there on virtual summits and virtually speaking everywhere, how's the monetization of that work for you?
Yeah, well, so for me, mostly what I do is I work with people and I help them to build a virtual speaking business of their own. So I monetize through a high ticket offer where I bring in people who know that they would like to get started speaking virtually, and they maybe are authors, maybe they're already speaking, but they haven't perfected the virtual realm yet. And I support them to really get clear on who their perfect prospects are, and to get really clear on what they're going to transmit when they go out into the world and get onto these virtual stages, and how they're going to be selective about what kinds of stages are going to be the right fit, the perfect stages for them, where they will be able to connect with their perfect prospects, and then how to monetize the whole thing. And so, the interesting thing is that, a lot of people just throw it out there like spaghetti against the wall, and they aren't focused on those things that are really important, which is being clear on who your perfect prospect is, and, being on the right stages. You could go on multiple podcasts and have your message be heard by millions of people, but if they're not your perfect prospects, then you're really using a lot of energy and getting very little return. So I developed a quiz, actually, Michelle, that helps people to identify their speaker magic. And I've identified that there are 5 different types of speakers, and each one of those types of speakers, there's a different platform that works for them. And some people who are speakers, a podcast or being on the media is a perfect platform for them. Other speakers, it's a better platform for them to develop their own small community and be regularly speaking to that community. So each of the speaker magic archetypes actually aligns with a different type of platform or stage. And when they take the quiz, they can find out what their archetype is. And then if they feel like they'd like to talk to me about finding out more about that and what their right fit stage might be, that's how I do business. I get on the phone and I consult with people.
Yeah, no, I love that. And where can we find out more about this quiz? You have it somewhere for us to check
I
out?
do. Yeah, they can go to quiz.beheardbymillions.com. quiz.beheardbymillions.com.
Great. And we'll also put that in the show notes too, so people can find it there. And how cool is that to kind of figure that out before, amplify your audience? I just want you to make sure you heard that before you think about podcasting or think that you're ready to start your show. Be a great idea to check out this quiz to really find out if podcasting is really a fit for you, or if it's better for you to be doing, Facebook Lives into a small community Facebook group, or whatever other kind of speaking, podcasting is not for everyone, but it is great for the right people, right?
That's right. That's right. And if they do decide that they want to try podcasting, I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea to be a podcast guest to hone your message, to just hone your message. If you're just starting out, practice is always good, right? But lower your expectations of what you're going to get for a return if you're right at the beginning, and focus more on where you're going to get the greatest level of return for the amount of energy that you're putting in.
Yeah, that's a great message, because I think when you get invited onto virtual summits, they'll have a different topic and a different focus, and perhaps different audiences. So how did you navigate this when you were out there? Were you tailoring your message to each a topic, or were you kind of keeping the same topic so that it was consistent every time? I always wondered about this.
Yeah, so initially I was all over the place, Michelle, but over the years I have narrowed. And now that I'm even more solid in who I am and what I speak about, I am able to take my message and align it to the overall message of whatever the summit is on, just like we're having this conversation right now, right? Because we could talk about a lot of things. We could talk about speaking. We could talk about, developing your high ticket program. We could talk about, making sure that you're charging the right amount of money, which is something else that I help people with, right? We could talk about all of those things, but it all comes back to having the conversation with me, so that I can help the person discern what the right next step is for them. And if I have something that I feel is of service for them, then I offer it and we start to work together. So to answer your question about the summits, yes, often it is a specific topic that the summit is putting out there that either it's aligned with your message or it's not. And if it's not aligned with your core message, then you shouldn't be on the summit. And one of the things that I offer when I work with people in my Be Heard by Millions Blueprint Bootcamp is I actually have a template of criteria for selecting what stages you want to be on. Because initially, a lot of newbie speakers, they just want to say yes to everything. And maybe for the first month or two, but you really actually want to have a criteria for who your perfect strategic alliances are, who your perfect partners are, because we don't need to be wasting. We want to be efficient with how we're spending our time and our energy.
Yeah, I love that. And especially like when you're looking at going on it to be a guest on podcasts too, you want to make sure you're serving the podcast host audience too. So you really want to make sure it's the right audience. And not only that, it's going to really benefit you in the end if it is the right audience, right? So it's really interesting. And, clearly you're a perfect fit for our audience, coaches, authors, speakers, people are looking at podcasting, looking at speaking. Like this is perfect audience. We have very synergistic audiences, which is fantastic. So yeah, I think that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at going on podcasts to amplify your audience. Make sure you heard that. So really do your research and listen to the show. Find out who their audience is, and take a look on iTunes below where it says what other podcasts are they subscribed to, because that will also help in a huge way as well. So let's talk about your book for a second. I love the title of it. I love the messaging, and what else is in your book that you're willing to share with us without us diving too deep? We want to leave some for when we read it.
Well, I think the main thing that most people are challenged by is the book actually outlines my 7 steps that I took to create my virtual speaking business and to generate, more than $2 million from home in my PJs as a single mom.
I love that.
And the thing that I see in the industry that is a lot of the people who are especially heart-centered and people who are creative and people who are called, my people are people who are like, I am so called to deliver this message. A lot of times what happens is they are so called, right? They're so motivated to deliver the message that they forget about the money part, right? So there's a whole chapter on mastering the art of the ask. And the art of the ask is more than just about asking for money. It's also about asking for audience members to gather And it's also about asking for the right strategic alliances, which we've already talked about, who will likely have your perfect prospects in their audience. So the art of the ask is chapter, let me tell you exactly what chapter that is.
Excellent.
And you can find Be Heard by Millions and Live Your Destiny on Amazon in both Kindle as well as paperback format. It is chapter 6, the art
Chapter
of the
6,
ask.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so guys, make sure you head over there to Amazon and pick up the book, because I think it's going to be really helpful for everybody, especially if the framework that you've laid it out in the 7 steps. I think it's important, because I think people just jump into delivering content and like without the strategy around like, the right steps to take for that as well.
Exactly.
Yes, I'm looking forward to my copy coming. Yay. Awesome.
Well, I'm looking forward to your copy coming too.
Yes, I'll tell you. I'll give you a nice review when it comes.
Thank
and
you.
I read it. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Now, you said something really interesting that I'm sure a lot of our listeners were like, "What? You sold a podcast?" Like, that's something that we do not hear very often. So you have 2 really cool podcasts that have done very well successfully. And before we go into the selling of the podcast, what do you think made them super successful in the setup and the launching of them and the ongoing success of them?
Yeah, I think we already talked a little bit about that. First, I've been in this industry for a dozen years. So I have a deep and wide web of strategic alliances. And I practiced the art of the ask from chapter 6, right? And I asked for a lot of help. I asked for a lot of help from people that, I've spoken for years on a number of stages. I've promoted a lot of people. I had social capital in my bank account. In my social capital bank account, it is like overflowing. My social capital bank account is still overflowing.
Amazing.
Right?
I love that. Yeah.
So having that social capital to leverage and those relationships, I mean, that was the key for sure to getting the level of success that we've accomplished with both of the shows. And then the second thing I would say is I actually started to exercise my celebration muscle, which was something that took me a long time to do. I was definitely one of those people who would be like, let's accomplish something and we're done with that and move on to the next thing. Oh, let's accomplish something. We're done with that. Move on to the next thing. And without really celebrating. So I did really focus intensely on celebrating every little new step that happened with, first Men on Purpose podcast and now Wickedly Smart Women. I love celebrating that we're in 97 countries around the world, right? So that was my little celebration thing that I would put out there. Oh my God, we just got added in Colombia. Oh my goodness, Denmark is tuning in. And putting a lot of celebration energy into social media, I think that was a really big help as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love it. And this celebrating something is something we all need to practice a little bit more of, celebration, right? Bringing that joy into what we do. So the Men on Purpose podcast, can you tell us a little bit about what was the idea behind starting the Men on Purpose podcast?
Yeah, so I went through a period where there was a big personal rupture in my life. I had a personal rupture in my life in 2016, and that rupture in my life led to kind of a dissolution of everything, the way my life had been set up at that point. And then in 2017, I started to rebirth, right? There was a rebirthing and a rebranding, and Creative Age Leader and Creative Age Consulting Group came out of that. And then in that process, I was inspired to start serving men. And as I thought about serving men, that was when the podcast kind of arrived on the scene as a method and an opportunity to connect with the men that I felt called to serve. Well, I did the podcast for two plus years, and by right as we were coming up to the second anniversary, I became very clear that the show was more than just a podcast, that the show for me had been a healing journey to help me heal my dysfunctional relationship with the opposite sex. And as I approached the second year anniversary, I began to feel like I'm almost done with this. And so I had already thought at the end of last year about putting the show on hiatus. And I had shows lined up through the end of April, and it was already kind of like the energy was just dying, and I was going to put it on hiatus and see what was going to happen. I was just going to let it sit for a while. And then at the New Media Summit, I was an icon of influence, and there was another icon of influence in our post-summit mastermind who was just struggling with wanting to create something for himself. And as I was sitting there, I was like, wonder if he'd like to buy the show. And so I approached him at the end of the mastermind and said, well, would you be interested in buying the show? And he was like, oh my God, this is like the answer to my prayers. And he was someone, I just want to say, Michelle, he was somebody who had hosted a show, but he didn't own it. He did not own the show. And he wanted the creative power to build and grow a show of his own, but he already knew how to grow a show that was somebody else's. So it was such perfect alignment. And I know that he's going to do a wonderful, wonderful job with the show. Actually, this coming Friday is the passing of the mic episode. Cool. And as of next Monday, he will be behind the mic all by himself. And he's going to grow the show, and he's going to now turn it into a movement. So, it's just perfect.
That is timing. So cool. Yeah. I really love that.
And I'm
story.
just really, really grateful that I listened to my own inspiration.
Yeah, that's amazing. Sorry, we've got a bit of a delay going on here. And I just wanted to share with you like how amazing I think that is. And so when you're doing a passing of the mic, is that going to be, you are both going to co-host the show and then pass the mic to him, and then he'll be the host continuing on? Or like, how does that work when you sell a podcast to someone?
Yes. So what we did was I allowed all of the episodes that I had recorded to run out. So the last episode was the last Monday of April. And then when we made the deal, we strategized over how to do the transition. And what we decided to do was to do 4 interviews with guests with both of us. So, and to run a whole week of interviews. And then on the 5th day, to be just him and I, and me officially saying I'm complete and here's the mic and off you go. So my show, Men on Purpose, was always just a Monday, aired on Monday. Every Monday, Men on Purpose Monday, the show was airing. So this week, the show is airing every single day with both of us plus a guest. And then on the 5th day, it's just him and I, and then off he goes into the wild blue yonder.
That's awesome. I love that. How cool is that? So that's really exciting. We'll have to watch Men on Purpose and for its evolution. And I can see he's just going to go, create the movement, create the courses, the retreats. I'm sure like it's the world's his oyster now with that show. That's really great. I love that setup. It's really neat. Well, what about Wickedly Smart Women? I want to hear about that show too. You're going to keep that one, right?
Yes. So right now, Wickedly Smart Women, as soon as I'm finished with the transfer of Men on Purpose podcast, I'm going to kind of double down on my focus on Wickedly Smart Women and spend more time celebrating Wickedly Smart Women than I have been, because it's kind of been like the younger sister that didn't get as much attention as the older brother. So I'm going to put more of my focus and attention on Wickedly Smart Women. But the other thing that's going to happen is the guy who I sold the show to, we've decided we're going to actually create a program to teach people how to buy and sell a podcast. So I'm really excited that you're asking me that question, because, kind of separate from all the things we've already talked about, if anybody is interested in learning how to buy or sell a podcast, then just hit me up directly and we'll put you on the waiting list for that at, my email address, me@emeraldgreenforest.com. We'll put you on the waiting list for that, and we'll let you know when we get that program put together.
That's awesome. I love it. So Emerald, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the Wickedly Smart Women podcast. So who do you interview? Obviously, Wickedly Smart Women. Where do you find these women? What are the kinds of stories that you're getting in that show? I'd love to hear a bit more about that one.
Yeah, so the women again are part of at the beginning. A lot of them were colleagues of mine, and now I'm taking applications from guests for people who are interested in being guests. They can just go to wickedlysmartwomen.com and press the apply button. Mostly what I want to do with that show is really elevate, celebrate, and spotlight wickedly smart women and the fun things that they're doing across all industries, to not only be delivering powerful world-changing messages, but also to show that they can create a life of their own dreams and create income that is. Wickedly smart women I know have become very clear on what a wealthy life looks like to them. And, wealth, as far as I'm concerned, is more than just money. It is the sum total of all the things that really matter in your life, including your time and your health and your intuitive connection, and how you're exchanging energy, which means money, and also, of course, having fun. So with your friends and your family and your fellow travelers on the journey. So, for me, wickedly smart women are women who understand how to have all the things in their life line up in a way that brings them the most joy and allows them to deliver their most potent contribution into the world. Yeah. So that's what's going on over at Wickedly Smart Women.
Amplify You family. I'm sure you're going to enjoy that podcast a lot. I would highly recommend you guys go over and subscribe to Wickedly Smart Women and also Men on Purpose, because I think those are such really great shows that really just the different variety of people you've been interviewing on them are just so interesting and unique. And I learned something from every episode I listen. And I learn about a new person to follow too. I'm following everyone that you've been interviewing. It's been really awesome. So I highly recommend, audience, you guys go over there. I really check it out and subscribe and follow along too. It's a really great show. And so, Emerald, I just wanted to thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your stories of getting started virtually speaking and your book and selling a podcast. And guys, yeah, if you're interested in learning how to sell a podcast, definitely, check out what Emerald's going to offer. I think it's going to be really a neat program that I'm going to check out too, because that's something's always in people's mind. So Emerald, I just wanted to thank you so much for being with us today and spending some time with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I'm so grateful.
All right, Amplify You family, make sure you check out the show notes for all the links to finding Emerald, and don't forget to take the quiz and find out what kind of speaker and what kind of audience that you would resonate with the most. So until next time, go out there, share your message, and see you next week.